When I left the orphanage, I learned my grandmother left me everything. But in the barn, I discovered the one thing she never wanted me to find: the truth. It's a story about how the place you run from can sometimes be the only place that's truly waiting for you. And if you've ever felt lost, or like you didn't have a place to call your own, I hope you'll stick around and subscribe, because this channel is for people who know what it feels like to build a home out of the pieces you've been left with. The air on the other side of the gate tasted different. For 18 years, every breath I'd taken had been filtered through the institutional beige of St. Jude's Home for Boys. It was recycled air, smelling of disinfectant, industrial-grade laundry soap, and the faint underlying sorrow of 100 other boys who, like me, were waiting for a life that always seemed to be happening somewhere else. But on my 18th birthday, the waiting was over. I stood outside the wrought iron gates, holding a single, worn duffel bag containing 2 changes of clothes, a worn-out copy of a book I'd read a dozen times, and $112 in cash, my official send-off from the state. The gate clicked shut behind me with a sound of finality that was both terrifying and thrilling. I was free. I was also completely and utterly alone. My caseworker, a tired-looking woman named Mrs. Gable, had given me the bus ticket and a thin manila envelope an hour earlier. "This is it, Leo," she'd said, not unkindly, but with the detached professionalism of someone who had watched countless boys walk out this same door. "Your file is closed. The state's obligation is fulfilled." Inside the envelope, along with the cash, was a single sheet of paper with the name and address of a lawyer, Arthur Abernathy, Esconer, located in a town called Sparrow Creek, a place I'd never even heard of. A handwritten note at the bottom read, regarding the estate of Eleanor Vance. My grandmother. The name felt foreign on my tongue. I hadn't seen her since I was 5 years old, a hazy memory of a woman with flour on her hands and a laugh that smelled like cinnamon. She'd sent a card every year on my birthday, a simple, store-bought thing with a $5 bill tucked inside, until 3 years ago, when they'd just stopped. I'd assumed the worst, and the silence from the administration at St. Jude's had confirmed it. No one ever told me she had an estate. I figured she had nothing, just like me. The bus ride was 4 hours of watching the city's gray sprawl bleed into suburbs, then into patchy farmland, and finally into dense, rolling hills of green. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, a stranger in a world I was supposed to belong to. Other passengers talked on their phones, laughed with friends, slept with their heads on the shoulders of loved ones. I was an island, a ghost in transit. Sparrow Creek wasn't so much a town as a crossroads with a post office, a general store, and a diner whose sign flickered weakly. Mr. Abernathy's office was a small brick building, squeezed between the store and a dusty antique shop. The bell above the door chimed softly as I entered. The office smelled of old paper, leather, and coffee. A man, who must have been in his late 60s, looked up from a desk buried under towers of files. He had kind, tired eyes and a neatly trimmed gray beard. "You must be Leo," he said, his voice a low, comforting rumble. He stood and extended a hand. His grip was firm. "Arthur Abernathy, I've been expecting you. Please, sit." I sank into the leather chair opposite his desk. It sighed under my weight. "Mrs. Gable said you had something for me," I said, my voice sounding small and hoarse. He nodded, peering at me over his spectacles. "I was your grandmother's lawyer for over 30 years, and her friend. She was a remarkable woman, Leo, stubborn as a mule, but with a heart bigger than this whole valley." He paused, letting the words settle in the quiet room. "Eleanor passed away 3 months ago. I'm very sorry. She spoke of you often." I just nodded. I didn't know what to say. How do you mourn someone you can barely remember? He seemed to understand. He shuffled some papers on his desk and pulled out a thick, official-looking document. "Eleanor's will is quite straightforward," he began, his tone shifting to something more formal. "She had no other living relatives. As her sole heir, she left her entire estate to you." I must have looked confused because he smiled gently. "The house, the land, the barn, all of it. 40 acres, free and clear. It's all yours, Leo." The words didn't compute. Estate, heir, 40 acres. It sounded like a story about someone else. Boys from St. Jude's didn't inherit things. We aged out with a duffel bag and a bus ticket to nowhere. I don't understand," I stammered. "She had a farm?" "She did," he confirmed. "It's about 5 miles out of town. It's where she was born, where your mother was born. It's been in your family for nearly a century." He slid a large, tarnished iron key across the polished surface of the desk. It was heavy, ornate, like something from a fairy tale. "This is for the front door." I stared at the key, then back at him. My mind was a whirlwind of disbelief and a fragile, terrifying flicker of hope. A home. A place that was mine. It was a concept so alien it felt dangerous to even consider. "There are some practical matters," Mr. Abernathy continued, pulling me back to reality. "The property taxes are paid up for the year. Eleanor was frugal. She left a small savings account to cover immediate expenses. It's not a fortune, but it's enough to get you on your feet." He handed me another envelope, this one thicker than the last. "There's a bank card in there and some papers you'll need to sign, but we can deal with that later. First, you need to get out there. See the place for yourself." He saw the look on my face, the uncertainty. "You don't have a car, I take it?" I shook my head. "No problem. My secretary, Janice, was heading home anyway. She lives out past your grandmother's place. She can give you a ride." Janice was a cheerful, round woman who chattered about the weather and the upcoming town bake sale as we drove. Her car smelled like vanilla air freshener and cinnamon gum. I barely heard her, my mind still reeling. I held the iron key in my pocket, its weight a constant, unbelievable reminder. We turned off the main road onto a gravel lane marked by a faded wooden sign that read, "Vance." The lane was long and winding, flanked by overgrown fields and towering oak trees that formed a canopy overhead. And then we rounded a final bend, and I saw it. The house was a simple, 2-story farmhouse, its white paint peeling in places, its dark green shutters faded by the sun. It looked tired but sturdy, nestled in a grove of ancient maples. Behind it, perched on a small rise, was a massive red barn, its roofline stark against the pale blue sky. It was beautiful. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Janice pulled to a stop in the gravel driveway. "Well, this is it," she said softly. "Home sweet home." She must have seen the dazed look in my eyes. "Take your time, honey. It's a lot to take in." I got out of the car, my duffel bag feeling impossibly light. I stood there in the driveway, just looking. The air was clean and smelled of damp earth, cut grass, and something faintly sweet like honeysuckle. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves in the trees. For the first time in my life, the world wasn't loud. It wasn't crowded. It was just quiet. I walked up the stone path to the front porch. The wooden steps creaked under my feet. I pulled the heavy iron key from my pocket. My hand was trembling as I fitted into the lock. It turned with a satisfying, metallic clunk. The door swung inward, opening into darkness. I took a deep breath and stepped across the threshold. The air inside was cool and still, thick with the scent of dust, old wood, and dried lavender. Sunlight streamed through the grimy windows, illuminating swirling motes of dust in long, golden shafts. The entryway opened into a living room. The furniture, a floral sofa, a sturdy armchair, a coffee table, was draped in white sheets like sleeping ghosts. To my left was a staircase leading up to the second floor. To my right, a doorway led into what I assumed was the dining room and kitchen. It was a house frozen in time, waiting. I dropped my duffel bag by the door. I walked slowly into the living room, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I reached out and pulled the sheet off the armchair. The fabric underneath was worn but clean. I ran my hand over the armrest, imagining my grandmother sitting here, reading a book, looking out the window. I felt like an intruder, a stranger in a sacred space. But the key in my pocket said otherwise. This was my house now. My home. The thought was so overwhelming I had to sit down. I sank into the armchair, the dust motes dancing around me. For 18 years, I'd been a number, a file, a temporary resident in a system that owned everything I touched, from the bed I slept in to the clothes on my back. Now I was sitting in my own chair, in my own house, on my own land. The sheer scale of it was impossible to grasp. I sat there for a long time, just breathing, letting the silence of the house seep into me, pushing out the years of noise and chaos from St. Jude's. The sun began to set, painting the room in hues of orange and purple. Hunger finally gnawed at me, a real physical need that grounded me in the present moment. I got up and made my way toward the back of the house, looking for the kitchen. I found it through the dining room. It was a large country kitchen with a big wooden table in the center. The countertops were faded linoleum, the appliances were old, but it felt warm and lived in, even covered in a thin layer of dust. And there, sitting in the exact center of the table, was another envelope. It was thick, creamy-colored paper, and my name, Leo, was written on the front in a shaky but elegant script. It was from her. My heart hammered against my ribs. I picked it up. The paper felt heavy, important. I slid it open with my thumb and pulled out several folded pages. The same handwriting covered them, line after line. I sat down at the table and began to read. "My dearest Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have finally come home. I am so sorry, my boy. Sorry for so much. Sorry that I could not be there to watch you grow, and sorry for the silence of these last few years. My illness made it difficult to write. Please know that not a day went by when I did not think of you." I had to stop and take a breath. A lump was forming in my throat. I'd spent so many years building a wall around that part of my heart, the part that wondered about her, that felt abandoned by her. Now her words were dismantling it, brick by brick. "I know you must have 1,000 questions," the letter continued, "and I promise you will find the answers here. But first, you must live. This house needs life in it again, Leo. It needs you. The pantry is stocked with canned goods. The well pump is in the cellar. The switch is on the wall. The electricity and phone are still connected. I paid them ahead for a year. I wanted to make sure you had a soft place to land." A soft place to land. The phrase made my eyes burn. I had never had a soft place in my entire life. I read on. "There is money in the savings account Mr. Abernathy told you about. Use it for whatever you need. Groceries, new clothes, a truck if you can find a decent used one. Don't be afraid to spend it. I saved it for you. This farm is your birthright, but it is also a responsibility. The land has been good to our family, and you must be good to it in return. Learn its rhythms. Walk the fields. Listen to the wind in the pines. It will teach you things I never could." The letter went on, giving me practical advice about the house, where the fuse box was, which window tended to stick. How to light the old oil furnace. It was a user's manual for a life I'd never known. And then, at the end, came the part that changed everything. There is more you need to know, Leo, much more. The story of our family is not a simple one, and the truth of why you were sent away is complicated. I have left everything for you to find. I couldn't bear to write it all down in one place. It is a heavy burden, and I want you to shoulder it bit by bit. When you are ready, go up to the attic. In the far corner, under the eaves, you will find an old sea trunk. The next piece of the puzzle is in there, but do not rush. Settle in first. Let this place become your home before you go digging up its ghosts. Be safe, my boy, and know that I have always, always loved you. Your grandmother, Eleanor. I folded the letter and placed it carefully back in the envelope. Ghosts. The word hung in the air. The quiet of the house suddenly felt heavier, filled with unspoken secrets. I spent the rest of the evening following her instructions. I found the switch for the well pump and soon had clean cold water running from the kitchen tap. I explored the pantry and found it just as she'd said, shelves lined with jars of preserves, canned vegetables, bags of flour and sugar. It was a fortress against hunger. I made myself a simple meal of soup and crackers, eating at the big wooden table where she had written her letter to me. After I ate, I walked through the house, pulling the sheets off the furniture, opening windows to let in the cool night air. The house began to feel less like a museum and more like a home. I found a small bedroom upstairs that I decided would be mine. The bed was already made, covered with a thick, handmade quilt. It looked out over the front fields. That night, I slept more soundly than I ever had at St. Jude's, tucked under my grandmother's quilt, in my own bed, in my own room. But my dreams were restless, filled with shadows and whispers, and the image of a massive red barn standing silent under a sky full of stars. For the next few days, I followed her advice. I didn't rush. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, scrubbing away the years of dust. I bought groceries in town, feeling the curious but not unfriendly eyes of the locals on me. I was the Vance boy, the ghost who had returned. I spent hours just walking the property. The 40 acres were a mix of overgrown fields, dense woods, and a small clear creek that cut through the back of the land. I found the old vegetable garden, now choked with weeds, and made a mental note to try and clear it. I was starting to feel the rhythm of the place, just as she'd said I would. The farm was slowly claiming me, but the attic and the barn loomed in my mind, the sea trunk, the ghosts. Finally, after a week of settling in, I knew it was time. I pulled the cord for the attic stairs, a cloud of dust billowing down. The air up there was hot and thick, smelling of cedar and thyme. And just as she'd described, in the far corner, half buried under a pile of old blankets, was a large, dark green sea trunk, bound with leather straps. My heart pounded as I knelt before it. The clasps were rusted, but not locked. I lifted the heavy lid. Inside, the scent of mothballs and old paper was overwhelming. It was filled with photo albums, stacks of letters tied with ribbon, and old, brittle documents. I lifted out the top photo album. The first page had a picture of a young couple, smiling, standing in front of this very house. The woman was beautiful, with my eyes. The man had his arm around her, looking proud and happy. A caption in my grandmother's handwriting read, "Michael and Sarah. Wedding day, 1999. My parents. I had never seen a photograph of them before. At St. Jude's, my past was a blank page. They were just names on a form, deceased. Seeing their faces, so full of life and love, was like a punch to the gut. I traced their smiles with my finger, a wave of grief for the life I never had washing over me. I spent the next hour poring over the albums, watching my parents build a life on this farm. Pictures of them painting the house, planting the garden, holding me as a baby. In every photo, they looked happy. Blissfully, painfully happy. Then I found a smaller, leather-bound journal tucked in the side of the trunk. It was my mother's. Her handwriting was neat, flowing. The entries were filled with the small joys of her life. The first tomato from the garden, the sound of my father's laughter, her hopes for me. But as I read further, the tone began to change. The entries became more sporadic, tinged with anxiety. She mentioned a company, Horizon Development, that wanted to buy their land. At first, the offers were friendly. Then they became more insistent. "They don't want to take no for an answer," she wrote. "Michael says they're bullies, but it's more than that. There's something wrong about them. They want this land too badly." The last entry was dated 2 days before the accident that took their lives. It was short, almost frantic. Michael found something. In the woods, by the old quarry. He says it explains everything. He's going to the authorities tomorrow. He told me to take Leo and go to Mom's if he's not back by noon. I'm scared. I closed the journal, my hands shaking. An accident. That's what they had told me. But this wasn't an accident. This was something else entirely. Tucked inside the back cover of the journal was another note from my grandmother. This one was short. "Your father was a good man, Leo, a brave man. He saw something wrong, and he tried to make it right. They silenced him for it. I couldn't let them get you too. I did the only thing I could think of to make you disappear, to keep you safe. I sent you away. It broke my heart, but I would do it again. The rest of the story isn't in this house. It's in the barn." The barn. It stood there on the hill, a silent red giant, holding the final, heaviest secrets. The sun was setting as I walked out of the house and up the grassy slope toward it. The big, sliding doors groaned in protest as I forced them open. The inside of the barn was vast, much bigger than it looked from the outside. The air was thick with the sweet, earthy smell of old hay and dust. Light filtered in through the grimy windows high above, casting long, cathedral-like beams through the gloom. On one side were empty animal stalls. On the other, a mountain of old hay bales reached almost to the rafters. In the center of the dirt floor sat an old rust-pocked tractor, looking like a sleeping dinosaur. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. This place was an archive of my family's life, and their death. I didn't know where to begin. Her note had been so vague. "It's in the barn." I started searching, methodically at first, then with growing desperation. I checked the stalls, the feed bins, the loft filled with rotting hay. I found old tools, mason jars, a child's forgotten toy truck, fragments of a life, but not the answers I was looking for. Hours passed. Darkness fell outside, and the barn grew pitch black. I found an old lantern and got it working, its flickering yellow light casting dancing, monstrous shadows on the walls. I was about to give up, overwhelmed by frustration and sorrow, when my foot hit a loose floorboard near the old tack room at the back. It wasn't much, just a slight give that shouldn't have been there. I knelt down, my heart starting to race again. I pried at the edge of the board with my fingertips. It was stuck fast. I ran back to the workbench and found a crowbar. With a groan of protesting wood, the board came up. And there, nestled in the dark, cool earth beneath the floor, was a small, heavy metal lockbox. It was cold to the touch and locked. Of course, it was locked. I searched for a key everywhere. I emptied old coffee cans full of nuts and bolts, sifted through dusty drawers, checked every nook and cranny in the tack room. Nothing. Defeated, I sat down on a hay bale, the heavy box in my lap. The lantern light flickered beside me. And then I saw it. Hanging on a nail right next to me was another, older lantern. A rusty railroad model. It was purely decorative, I'd thought, but something made me pick it up. It was heavier than it should have been. I twisted the base where the fuel would go, it unscrewed, and inside, wrapped in a small piece of oilcloth, was a small brass key. It felt like every moment of my life had been leading to this. The years of loneliness at St. Jude's, the bus ride, meeting Mr. Abernathy, finding the letters. It all came down to this box, this key. My hands were slick with sweat as I fitted the key into the lock. It turned with a soft click. I lifted the lid. Inside, there was no money, no treasure. Just a thick stack of papers, a few cassette tapes, and one last letter from my grandmother. This letter was the longest of all, her handwriting even shakier now, a testament to her fading strength. "My dearest Leo," it began again. "If you have found this, then you know most of the truth. But this is the hardest part. This is the part I have carried alone for 13 years. I took a deep breath and continued to read her final words, the story of what really happened to my parents. They had discovered that Horizon Development, the company that so desperately wanted their land, had been secretly and illegally dumping toxic waste into the abandoned quarry at the edge of their property for years. The chemicals were seeping into the groundwater, poisoning the creek, the very land they loved. My father, a man with a fierce sense of justice, had gathered proof. He took water samples, photos of the trucks coming in the dead of night, and copies of internal company memos that were given to him by a contact inside the company. He had everything he needed to expose them. The night before he was going to meet with a state environmental agent, 2 men from the company came to the house. My grandmother was there, visiting. She heard them arguing with my father, heard their threats. They wanted the evidence. He refused. They left, but the threat hung in the air. The next day, my parents' car went off the old bridge over Sparrow Creek. The police ruled it an accident, faulty brakes. But my grandmother knew better. It was murder. She knew the company would come for the evidence next, and when they couldn't find it, they would come for me, the only other person who knew my father's secret. So she did the only thing she could. She hid the evidence here, in the one place no one would ever think to look. And then she hid me. She gave me up to the state, severing all legal ties, making me a ward of a system so vast and anonymous I would simply disappear into it. She created a story about being an unfit guardian, an alcoholic, a woman who couldn't cope. She sacrificed her name, her reputation, her heart, all to keep me safe. "They watched me for years, Leo," she wrote. "I couldn't contact you beyond those simple cards. I couldn't risk them connecting you back to this place, back to the evidence. I had to let you believe I'd abandoned you. It was the cruelest, most necessary thing I have ever done. This box contains all the proof your father collected. The water analysis reports, the photographs, the tapes of his phone calls with his informant. It is all there. What you do with it is now your choice." And that's when it hit me, the full weight of her sacrifice. She had endured the scorn of the town, the loneliness of this empty house, the agony of knowing her only grandson was growing up in an orphanage, all to protect me. She hadn't abandoned me. She had built a fortress around me with her own broken heart. I cried then, not the quiet, sad tears of a lonely boy, but huge, racking sobs of a man who had just been given back a past he never knew he had, a love he never knew he'd been wrapped in. I cried for my parents, for their bravery. I cried for my grandmother, for her incredible, painful strength. And I cried for the lost boy who had spent 18 years feeling utterly alone when he had been fiercely loved the entire time. The letter ended with one final haunting paragraph. Horizon Development never stopped wanting this land. They need it to cover their crime forever. Their offers will come again. They will offer you more money than you have ever dreamed of. You could take it, Leo. You could sell this place, destroy this box, and disappear. Live a safe, comfortable life anywhere in the world. No one would blame you. It is what I wanted for you all those years, for you to be safe, or you could fight. You could use what is in this box to seek justice for your parents. But they are a powerful company. They will not go down easily. They will try to destroy you, just as they did your father. The choice is yours, safety or justice, a quiet life or a righteous one. Whatever you choose, know that your parents and I will be proud of you. You are a Vance, and we are not easily broken. I sat there in the flickering lantern light of the barn, the cold metal box on my lap, holding the choice in my hands, safety or justice. It was the heaviest thing I had ever held. My entire life had been about survival, about staying quiet, staying invisible, not making waves. All I had ever wanted was a home, a place to be safe. And now I had it. I could take their money. I could walk away from Sparrow Creek, away from the ghosts and the pain, and start over. It was the sensible thing to do. It was what my grandmother had sacrificed everything for. But then I thought of my parents' smiling faces in the photograph. I thought of my father's courage, my mother's fear. I thought of my grandmother, living out her days in this lonely house, guarding their secret, guarding me. Could I let their sacrifice, their very lives, mean nothing? Could I live with myself, knowing I had chosen comfort over their memory? The silence of the barn seemed to hold its breath, waiting for my answer. You know, it's strange how a single moment can bring your entire life into focus. Sitting there in that barn, I realized that for 18 years, I hadn't really been living. I'd been waiting for my life to start, and now, here it was. This was the starting line. And the choice I made would define not just my future, but who I was, right down to my soul. Have you ever been at a crossroads like that? A moment where you have to choose between the easy path and the right one? It's a terrifying place to be. If you've made it this far in my story, I have a feeling you understand that feeling. This community we're building here is for people who get it, people who've had to make the hard choices. So, if this is hitting you, if you know what I'm talking about, hit that subscribe button. You're not alone in this. Your story matters here. Now, let's get back to the barn. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, the weight of the past and the future pressing down on me. I listened to the sound of my own breathing, the creak of the old timbers around me. I thought about the money Horizon would offer. It was an escape. It was freedom from worry, freedom from this heavy history. But it was also a chain. It would be blood money, hush money. Every dollar would be a reminder of my silence, of the justice I had traded for comfort. And I realized that home isn't just 4 walls and a roof. It's a place where you can be whole. It's a place where you don't have to hide from yourself. If I took that money, this house, this land, would never be a home. It would be a monument to my cowardice. I stood up, the decision settling in my bones, not with a crash, but with a quiet, solid click, like the lock on the box finally finding its purpose. I was my grandmother's grandson. I was my father's son, and we are not easily broken. The next morning, I called Mr. Abernathy. I told him I needed to see him, that I had found something important. When I arrived at his office, the lockbox sitting on the passenger seat of the old used truck I'd bought, he greeted me with a concerned look. "You look like you haven't slept, son," he said, ushering me inside. "I haven't," I replied, placing the box on his desk. But I think I'm finally awake. I told him everything. I laid out the contents of the box, the photos, the water reports, my mother's journal. I played him one of the cassette tapes, a recording of my father on the phone with his informant, their voices tinny and ghost-like. Speaking of falsified records and midnight convoys, Mr. Abernathy listened to it all without interruption, his face growing more grim with every piece of evidence I revealed. When I was finished, he sat back in his chair and was silent for a long time, staring at the box. "I knew it," he finally said, his voice a low whisper. "I always knew there was more to that story. Your grandmother. She was the strongest person I ever met. To carry this alone for all those years." He looked at me, his eyes full of a new respect. "She left you a terrible burden, Leo." "She left me a choice," I corrected him, "and I've made it. I want to fight them." He nodded slowly. "I thought you might. You have your father's fire." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "But we have to be smart about this. Horizon Development is a massive corporation with an army of lawyers. If we go to the press or the state police with this, they will bury us. They'll claim the evidence is fabricated. They'll dig into your past, your grandmother's past. They will tear us apart in court and drag it out for years until you have nothing left." My heart sank. It felt hopeless. "So, what do we do?" I asked. "We don't fight them in the light," he said, a shrewd glint in his eye. "We fight them in the shadows, just like they do. This evidence is our leverage. It's not about winning a public battle. It's about making them understand that the cost of fighting us is far greater than the cost of giving us what we want." Over the next week, Mr. Abernathy made some discreet inquiries. He used old contacts, lawyers who owed him favors, to build a picture of Horizon's current standing. They were in the middle of a massive merger, seeking to present a clean green image to their new partners. A public scandal about a decades-old toxic waste cover-up and a potential double homicide would be catastrophic for them. It was the perfect moment to strike. A formal letter arrived from Horizon Development 2 weeks later, just as my grandmother had predicted. It was a generous offer for the farm, far above market value. It was the quiet life, gift-wrapped. I threw it in the wood stove. Mr. Abernathy sent our reply. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was an invitation to a private meeting. He included a single, grainy photocopy of one of my father's pictures. A Horizon truck, its license plate clearly visible, parked by the quarry in the dead of night. The meeting was set for the following week in Mr. Abernathy's small, quiet office. 2 men in expensive suits showed up, their faces hard and emotionless. They were corporate sharks, sent to intimidate a small-town lawyer and an orphan boy. They started with pleasantries, then moved to their generous offer, then to veiled threats about the cost of litigation. Mr. Abernathy let them talk. Then he quietly slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. It was a list of our demands. It wasn't about money for me. It was about justice. We demanded that Horizon Development anonymously fund a complete, state-of-the-art cleanup of the quarry and the surrounding groundwater, to be overseen by an independent environmental firm. We demanded they establish a multi-million-dollar charitable trust for the community of Sparrow Creek, to fund scholarships, support local businesses, and protect the local environment. And we demanded a written, legally binding agreement that they would never, under any circumstances, attempt to purchase or develop any land within a 50-mile radius of the Vance farm again. One of the lawyers laughed. "This is absurd. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Mr. Abernathy didn't flinch. He simply pressed the play button on a small cassette player on his desk. My father's voice filled the room, clear and determined, detailing the exact chemicals they were dumping. The lawyers' faces went pale. "That's a copy." Mr. Abernathy said calmly. The originals are in a very safe place. If anything should happen to me or my client, they will be delivered to every major news outlet in the country, along with the rest of the evidence, and of course to the SEC right before your merger is finalized. Now, shall we discuss the terms of the trust? They left an hour later, their arrogance gone, replaced by a cold, quiet fury. We had won. It wasn't a dramatic courtroom victory. There were no headlines. My parents' names were never cleared in public. The world would never know what they did or what Horizon had done to them, but the land would be healed. The town would be protected, and their sacrifice would have meaning. It was a quiet justice, a private victory. The kind of victory I think my grandmother would have appreciated. Life on the farm found a new rhythm after that. The weight of the secret was gone, replaced by the simple, satisfying weight of hard work. I started clearing the overgrown vegetable garden. I repaired the fences. I gave the house a fresh coat of white paint, and the shutters a deep forest green. I spent my evenings on the porch, watching the fireflies, the silence no longer feeling empty, but full of peace. The people in town started to see me not as a ghost, but as a neighbor. They'd wave as I drove by in my truck. The owner of the general store started calling me by name, asking about the farm. I was becoming part of the fabric of the place. One afternoon, Mr. Abernathy drove out to the farm. He brought a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. We sat on the porch as the sun went down. "The first payment to the trust cleared this morning," he said, pouring us each a glass. "The cleanup crew starts at the quarry on Monday. You did it, Leo. You honored them." I looked out at the fields, golden in the late afternoon light. I thought of my grandmother's words. "This farm is your birthright, but it is also a responsibility." I had met that responsibility. I had protected her home, my home. "She would be so proud of you," he said, as if reading my mind. I raised my glass. "To Eleanor," I said, "and to Michael and Sarah." "To the Vances," he replied, clinking his glass against mine. "They are not easily broken." That night I walked up to the barn. I stood in the vast, quiet space and felt the presence of my family all around me. Not as ghosts to be feared, but as a warm, steadying force. The barn wasn't a place of secrets and sorrow anymore. It was a place of strength, a testament to my family's resilience. I had found the truth in that barn, yes, but I had also found something more. I had found my purpose. I had found my connection to a legacy of love and courage that had been waiting for me all along. I had come home, and I was finally, truly free. The story doesn't end there, of course. It's really just a beginning. There are still fences to mend, fields to plow, and a life to build. The scars of the past don't ever fully disappear. They become a part of you, a reminder of the battles you've fought and the strength you've found. But that's the beautiful thing about a second chance. It's not about erasing the past, it's about building a future that honors it. It's about taking the broken pieces you've been given and creating something whole. And that's the real lesson I learned. Home isn't something you're given. It's something you build. It's a choice you make every single day. A choice to fight for what's right, to honor the people you love, and to plant roots in the place you belong. For me, that place is here, on this land, under the watchful eye of that old red barn. What did this story teach you about the meaning of home? Or about the choices we make when faced with the easy wrong versus the harder right? I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Reading your stories, your reflections. It reminds me that none of us are alone in our struggles. It's why I started this channel, to share stories that matter for people who have been through it. So, if you haven't already, please subscribe and become a part of this community. Thank you for listening, and remember, No matter what pieces you've been left with, you have the strength to build a home. You just have to make the choice to start.